Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Yes, you guys, guess what? Today is Jean-Michel Trogneux's birthday. In other words, happy birthday, Brigitte Macron, to First Lady Brigitte Macron. So excited to get into this, to bring to audiences who exactly is Jean-Michel Trogneux, where he is. It's time to start that part of this series. So welcome back to our series, Becoming Brigitte. Okay, so some things to recap. I was so frustrated at the end of the last episode because so many of you had commented, Candace, it's time for you to create a family chart. And we had already created a family chart. We just got so busy that I forgot to show it to you, obviously, on the show. So I completely dropped the ball there. I apologize, of course, when we are doing these sorts of series like the Kamala series, and now as we look at this Brigitte series, there are so many names that it does become confusing, and it's good to slow it down and be able to visualize who and what exactly it is that we are talking about. So let's kind of go backwards and start there. I am showing you guys now the Emmanuel Macron family chart. Okay, these are allegedly, I'm saying allegedly here because I have tons of questions as we get deeper into the story, but his parents, Jean-Michel Macron, then you have Françoise Nogue. Obviously, we spoke a lot last week, particularly about Germaine Nogue, who he refers to affectionately as Manette, right? She's the one that shared this love of pedophile-centric books with her grandson. She is, as we mentioned to you last week, the only family member that he includes in his childhood stories throughout his autobiography, which is entitled Revolution. So wanted to get over that, wanted to speak about revolution, understanding that that is actually the Macron chart. And then, of course, like I said, his mother, what we described on last week's episode, or a couple of days ago, the episode was that Dr. Frances Nogue, his mother, when she was first introduced to the world, she was introduced as a pediatrician who helped out in some capacity the Social Security office. And then we had this huge bombshell in the last episode where we learned, just kidding, by Social Security work, we forgot to include the fact that she helps transgendered and intersex people secure new identities. I mean, that was a major, major, major tidbit. I mean, that really, it's explosive. And it's important for you to remember that as we go along, because that means that Macron's immediate family was involved in helping people, okay, who had gender issues to become someone else. In other words, they were facilitating the issuing of real government IDs, which allowed people to legally shed themselves of their former identities and their true biological sex. We have to wake up to the fact that that is the reality of the world that we live in today. So what is that? What are the implications of that? Let's just pause there. What are the implications of if I decide, okay, I'm Candace Owens, nope, I feel like actually I was born a man, and so I'm going to change my name. I'm going to change my name to Jean-Michel Trogneux, okay? And then someone comes out and they say, like, you know, Candace Owens is this person. Can I then sue them for defamation for saying that I'm Candace Owens if I've legally changed my name to Jean-Michel Trogneux? That become the basis of a defamation suit if you are able to shed your identity? I want you to think about that as we keep going throughout this series. It's very important to remember this, that his mother was dealing with this capacity in the Social Security office. I should also add here that thereafter, shockingly, in a very rare interview his mother gave to a journalist named Gail Chakaloff. She was writing a biography about the Macron couple. The biography was entitled Just the Two of Us. And she spoke with his mother, and his mother said something very strange. She said, and I quote, and it's in this book, "For me, Brigitte is not a daughter-in-law." Excuse me? What does that mean? Brigitte is married to your son. She's been married to your son for a very long time. She fell in love with your son when your son was 14 years old. What do you mean to me she is not a daughter-in-law? What is the implication of that? What else could she be? What else could the First Lady be to you? So we'll just leave that there. Okay, now let's take a look at Brigitte Macron's family chart, okay? We've got some other important things to remember. So you have Brigitte, who allegedly was married for 32 years to this guy, Andre Louis Ozier. Okay. And they allegedly had 3 children: Lawrence Ozier, Sebastian Ozier, and Tifon Ozier. Now, it's important to remember, which we touched upon last episode, that the First Lady just routinely sort of gets things wrong in her interviews, right? Like, she gets the date wrong from when her sister, Mary Vaughn, died. She had got the date very wrong from when her alleged niece died. And we're starting to think of this as more of a strategy than anything else. Like, it's not just forgetting dates, it's because you're trying to confuse the public. And a big indication of that was Tifon, okay, her daughter, getting both the date and the manner of her father's burial wrong in Paris Match magazine, weekly magazine. How is that possible? Remember, we talked about this. We can bring up that chart again. Very weird mystery regarding this Andre Louis Ozier character. How weird it was, we cannot emphasize enough. We learn from his first cousin, okay? He had a first cousin named John Louis Ozier, and that's where it got really confusing for some people. There is a first cousin, and that first cousin then described that essentially he had sued the journalists for misidentifying him in the wedding photo. That first cousin then got upset because the Élysée Palace kind of played him into suing her for defamation, pretending they were going to join the suit. But then also Brigitte Macron refused to simply say, bring that picture back up, yeah, that's me. That's me in the wedding photo. She refused to do this and just kind of backed out. And so he wasn't happy with this. The Oziers, he was not happy. He felt used by the Élysée Palace. He opened up to a journalist and tells us some really strange things about his cousin's burial, about his cousin's funeral, about his cousin's cremation. Mainly, the strangest thing being that the Élysée Palace was involved, okay? They wanted to see to it that this funeral was executed like a thief in the night. They did not want the public to learn about this. And they saw it over the finish line. And yet, despite this, Brigitte Macron did not attend the funeral of her alleged ex-husband of 32 years, the alleged father of her children. We want to make sure he's buried, okay? But we are not going to show up. Neither me or the president are going to show up. And then Tifon is going to just make up, a massive mistake in Paris Match and say, I buried my father on December 24th. And then we learn, no, he was actually cremated on December 28th. And it was a year prior. And this is the photo you use because everything was destroyed. Okay, that's crazy. So yes, remember that we learned that information, not from a conspiracy theorist. We learned this from the cousin, John Louis Ozier, the cousin of Andre. Okay, the one who successfully sued Natasha Ray for defamation because she wrongly assumed that it was him. Okay. What we do know, and we confirmed last episode, is that this man, and we can show you again his obituary photo because no other photos of him exist, from the wedding photo to this, his whole life has been destroyed. What we can tell you is that he did, in fact, exist. They lied about where he worked, what bank he worked at. Again, tons of little lies to send people down rabbit holes so they can make a mistake. But what we can't tell you is what exactly happened to him. We cannot ascertain what happened to him based on the testimony of his first cousin, because it depends on whether or not you believe his partner, the woman who was at his funeral, who claimed that she found tickets to Africa in his pocket, that he had emptied all of his bank accounts. And if you potentially, or you could say, or if you believe the journalist from Paris Match, who then wrote that Andre actually spent the last days of his life in a psychiatric ward being guarded by none other than Alexander Benalla. Now, we got to talk about this guy, okay? Because he's important. He's very important because he's come up actually a couple of times, but we should dig into deep of why that particular allegation matters. Because it's interesting that despite the fact that they love to sue people, they never went after that journalist who claimed that Alexander Benalla, the former deputy chief of staff to Emmanuel Macron, was guarding, for whatever reason, a psychiatric ward door of Andre. So we know for a fact that Élysée Palace was involved, at the very least, in his funeral. And this journalist puts that. So I think we should explore that. So we should talk about Alexander Benalla, because that is not a subtle mention from a journalist, okay? We had first mentioned Alexander Benalla in the introductory episode when we told you about sort of this, I don't know how to describe it, like a a syndicate almost of pedophiles. That's these accidental pedophiles that Emmanuel Macron keeps landing himself around, okay? We mentioned Olivier Duhamel. That was the man who was accused by his stepdaughter of having molested her twin brother when he was 13 or 14 years old. She wrote this in a book. And by the way, because the statute of limitations had passed, he was never brought to justice, but he admitted that it was true, that he did, in fact, sexually abuse his teenage son. Well, one of the things that he helped, because he was so close with Emmanuel Macron with, he helped him when he landed himself in hot water over what has come to be known in France as the Benalla affair, meaning Alexander Benalla, the deputy chief of staff, okay? And now, for whatever reason, like I said, we have no idea why this journalist mentioned, but said Alexander Benalla was guarding the psychiatric ward. So I'm going to show you Alexander Benalla again so that you can get him into your mind, despite being extremely young. I want to be clear. He is today only 33 years old. He's got quite a remarkable professional resume, okay? When Emmanuel Macron was running for president, Alexander Benalla was just 25 years old, and he served the candidate as his security officer. He was the head of his security, okay? Once Emmanuel Macron got elected, he then made Alexander Benalla his deputy chief of staff, okay? Huge position. Could you imagine 25 years old and you're like going into the White House, the Élysée Palace? It was then later discovered that these two had an incredibly close relationship, so close that Emmanuel took him on a ski trip with him and his family. Not as the security, as you're a part of the family on a ski trip. And even closer than that, Emmanuel Macron allowed Alexander Benalla, this 25, 26-year-old kid, essentially, to move into the national palace of the French Republic, okay? He was living at the Palace of the Alma. That is shocking. He had residency here, okay? So what's going on here? Just imagine you're 26, you're living in a palace, and I don't know, I'm thinking he must have provided some incredible security to the president. He must have done the president some solids, okay? When you dig into his past, you learn that back when Benalla was 23 years old, he had been accused and then subsequently acquitted of violence against a woman, okay? Insofar that she said that she was rendered incapacitated to work. But as I said, he was acquitted, and then he became the head of Emmanuel Macron's security team. Then, when Emmanuel Macron was president, a massive scandal broke, which came to be known, obviously, as the Benalla affair in 2018, when his deputy chief of staff was actually caught on camera, dressed as a police officer, beating protesters in the street of Paris. I'm not kidding, okay? Le Monde, I told you that's like the French New York Times, broke the story. They had footage of him. It was undoubtedly Benalla impersonating a police officer and beating a young protester in the streets. And then a second video emerged, which was published onto Twitter, which showed Benalla grabbing a female protester by the neck and dragging her away. Actually, I'm going to ask my producer, Skylar, were we able to pull that footage? Okay, great. Let's actually show you some of that footage. This is just to make you guys understand this. What you are looking at is a chief of staff of a president beating up a protester. He's going to come on in there in police uniform. That's him. Look at this. Just totally normal chief of staff stuff, right? That's just what everybody's chief of staff is doing all around the world. It would later be discovered that as people began investigating the story more and more, that 3 police officers provided him with more surveillance footage, Alexander Benalla. They were giving him surveillance footage that had not yet been made available to the public, essentially allowing for him to prepare his defense, which signals to us that, okay, they've got ties with the police officers. Clearly, otherwise, he wouldn't have been given the uniform to wear as he pretended to be a police officer that day. Now, President Macron, at the time of this attack, was in Australia. He seemed incredibly reluctant to let go of his deputy chief or to speak about the matter in any capacity publicly, essentially, which is why I guess he called up his Duhamel friend. What should I do? What do you mean, what should you do? Your chief of staff was just caught beating protesters in the street. Why aren't you just more shocked at that? What do you mean? What do you do? And it seems that Emmanuel Macron might have been so concerned about this that he tried to help Alexander out. Now, why am I making that assumption? Again, this is an assumption, not a fact. But what is a fact is that Alexander Benalla, when he was being interviewed about the scandal, none other than Mimi Marchand was in the room to assist him, speaking to the press. Mimi Marchand, yes, the Pope, the celebrity popess of the press, who could get anything in the press, anything taken out of the press, woman that could get the press to cover up pedophilia charges for her friends, okay? Eventually, as the scandal completely engulfed the Élysée Palace, they did in fact have to move to dismiss Benalla. On paper, at least. I want to be clear. On paper, he was released because then another scandal emerged. It would later be discovered that a few months later, they realized they did not actually remove his diplomatic passports. And despite being seemingly fired, several months later, he used those diplomatic passports to travel to meet with African leaders, including the president of Chad, a guy named Idris Deby. Now, for people that are watching this from Africa, you're looking at this guy going, didn't he die a few years later in kind of one of those stereotypical Western scenarios where suddenly a group of rebels rises up? Give me like a Muammar Gaddafi type situation and the rebels are just so unhappy and they kill the president. Yeah, that's what happened to that guy in Chad. Yeah. So, but I'm sure it was totally organic and people were really unhappy in the streets and like the West had nothing to do with it. Nonetheless, Alexander Benalla was meeting with this guy on diplomatic passports after he had been fired. So it was a second part of the scandal. It then emerged that while he was working for Macron, Alexander Benalla, this 26-year-old palace-living king, had actually contracted financial ties with two Russian oligarchs who were said to be members of the Russian mafia. Oopsies. Again, I guess everyone around me is accused of being either a criminal, a pedophile. So what? I'm sure Emmanuel Macron is always just so innocent in this. Brigitte, it just keeps happening to them. They're trying to work with good people, guys. They're really trying to surround themselves with good people. I swear, it's everyone around them. It's just not them. I think that we should actually take a look here at this extraordinary syndicate that is emerging around them, because we've covered a lot of these people. So Michelle Marchand, obviously the popess up there on the left, right of the French media. We know she's been involved in dirt. She's been kicked out, forgery, extortion, you name it. She's been accused of it. A woman that we understand had the capacity, the only person that people had to go through to get photos of the First Lady's pass. She owns Best Image, okay? And you're telling me this is the only person that can produce images from Brigitte Macron's past before she became a professor or a teacher? Seems a little suspect. Then below her, we have Bernard Arnault, richest man in the world because he controls LVMH. We mentioned his son-in-law, Xavier Niel, who was the in-between, the go-between between Mimi Marchand and the first couple. But I want you to also know that LVMH owns Paris Match. Okay, so that's where she's putting all of these doctored, airbrushed images, I would say airbrushed images of Brigitte so that everyone thinks she's like young and looking and irresistibly hot. She's working on that. Then we'll jump up to the right corner there. We mentioned Nicolas Ghesquière. This is the person that's dressing the First Lady, also under the LVMH empire, the one who is just putting transgendered people everywhere he can. Honestly, you should just Google Nicolas Ghesquière in your spare time, because we didn't even scratch the surface in terms of how dedicated he is to the trans cause and bringing all of these trans models and putting them on the runway and trying to trans everything. But I'm sure Brigitte Macron is exactly who he says he is. And just, I don't know, just wants to dress Brigitte Macron for whatever reason. It is what it is. Then, of course, as we mentioned, Emmanuel Macron's mother, Françoise Nogue, who we know is concerning her work to trying to get individuals who suffer from identity issues new identities. And doing this, by the way, this is legal. This is legal now, okay? And then we have there on the bottom, who we just discussed, was Alexander Benalla. So just piece all that together, okay? With forgery, extortion, and most importantly, with access to a woman who can facilitate the changing of identities, it is not enough for any person investigating this case to ask questions like, is this Brigitte Trogneux in the wedding photo? You will notice we didn't ask that question when my legal team got involved. We didn't say, is this Brigitte Trogneux in the wedding photo? We had to instead ask something more specific. Is this the current First Lady of France, Brigitte Macron, pictured here in this wedding photo? Okay? And that's when the couple gets real quiet. They don't want to answer those questions. Do you guys get what I'm getting at here? Okay? Because we can confirm that that is indeed a photo of a woman named Brigitte Trogneux in that wedding photo. Where that Brigitte is, we cannot confirm because the First Lady refuses to answer. She has a mother-in-law who helps transgendered people get new identities. So you have to essentially understand that you can just take somebody's name. You can become somebody else at a moment's notice. Now, legally, when you become transgendered, okay? This brings us to Jean-Michel Trogneux. Okay, we obviously have to discuss him. This is Brigitte Trogneux's brother. Today is his birthday. Happy birthday, Jean-Michel Trogneux. It's really important that we learn about him, a guy who was so close to his sister, two different people, his sister, Brigitte Trogneux, that she made him the best man at her wedding. But then he just was completely missing from mention when the First Lady, Brigitte Macron, came into power. Seemed to be purposeful to allow this person to fall through the cracks, despite all of the stuff being written about her family and where she came from. There was no mention of Jean-Michel Trogneux. That was the dog that was not barking. We're going to talk about him. We're going to allow that dog to bark. But first, I'm going to take a quick break here to remind you about some of our amazing sponsors. First and foremost, today's episode is sponsored by Momentous. When the goal is our health and being able to live better or longer, there are a few non-negotiables. One of them is quality. And when it comes to supplements geared toward high performers, no one does it quite like Momentous. They invest in an NSF certification, meaning every batch is tested for heavy metals, harmful additives, and label claim accuracy. Momentous is trusted by all 32 NFL teams and collegiate dietitians all over the country. Momentous believes in nailing the basics with bone-crushing consistency, then curating a routine based on your individual goals. And by basics, they mean protein and creatine. Momentous sources CreaPure, the purest form of creatine monohydrate available, and it's an absolute must for peak physical and cognitive performance for both men and women. So try them today by visiting livemomentous.com, and you'll get 20% off if you use code Candace. That is livemomentous.com with promo code Candace. Also, I tell you guys all the time, you're drinking coffee, you might as well be doing good while you're drinking coffee. So I want to tell you about 7 Weeks Coffee, because that is America's pro-life coffee company that's on a mission to fund the pro-life movement, one cup of coffee at a time. If you're wondering why on earth they are called 7 weeks, it is because at 7 weeks, a baby is the size of a coffee bean. And it is the same time that a heartbeat is clearly detected on an ultrasound. They donate 10% of every sale to support pregnancy care centers across the country. They have raised over $750,000 for these centers and have saved thousands of lives. Now, I can tell you the coffee is fantastic. It's mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, low acid, and organically farmed, so it checks all the boxes. And right now, when you subscribe to 7 Weeks Coffee, you'll get a free 2-pack of their new single-serve brew bags to take your coffee wherever life takes you. So whether you're traveling, working, adventuring, you can easily enjoy a rich, flavorful cup of coffee by adding hot water and letting the to-go bag steep for a few minutes. So go to 7weekscoffee.com and save 15% forever when you subscribe. And if you use code Candace, you'll get an extra 10% off your first order. So that's a total of 25% off. So visit 7weekscoffee.com and use code Candace at checkout today. All right, let's speak about Jean-Michel Trogneux. This has been trending in France. This has been explosive. Everybody knows something's going on here, but the English-speaking world did not understand what was happening. And there are a lot of questions even in the French-speaking world. They don't understand why it is that Xavier Poussard has not been sued for defamation, but Natasha Ray has. What is the difference? Xavier Poussard was always very clear with me that his major breakthrough came thanks to the work of Natasha Ray. She came to him and first said, like, this is Jean-Michel Trogneux. I've been working on this. So where did she fumble the ball and where did he not fumble the ball? And this is where it gets really interesting. And it was why it was so important for me to slow that down for you, that we are talking about two different individuals, Jean-Michel Trogneux and his sister Brigitte Trogneux. What you should know about Jean-Michel Trogneux was that he was born on February 11th, 1945. And regarding his existence, there can be no question. In fact, it is a stark contrast to trying to look into Brigitte Trogneux. Unlike his sister, Brigitte Trogneux, who like her husband, appears to have nearly every trace of her existence magically wiped, destroyed. You cannot get your hands on documents. In fact, Brigitte Trogneux, the person who's claiming to be in the Élysée Palace as Brigitte Macron, you would think it'd be very easy to get school pictures of her. You can't get them. Xavier Poussard has gone through court processes in order to get his hands on a yearbook that should be supplied by law, okay? She went to Sacred Heart, Sacré-Cœur. I hope I'm saying that okay in French. Sacré-Cœur. And they're supposed to give you the yearbook so you can look at a picture. Despite this, the school is refusing to do that. Now, why would a school refuse to give you a photo of the First Lady? Of the First Lady growing up? Why can't we see pictures of the First Lady in yearbooks that are in existence? Why can't we see her in elementary school, in middle school, in high school? Why is that? Why is it that every trace of Brigitte Trogneux's existence is impossible to garner? And it was also difficult, but not impossible to garner stuff about Jean-Michel Trogneux. And we were able to piece together a very clear timeline of his existence until he kind of magically falls off of a cliff. So we will walk you through this timeline, okay? Jean-Michel, as I told you, born in 1945. We then know that he begins attending a Jesuit academy. We have multiple photos of him at a Jesuit academy. And I'm going to show you one of them, I believe, that we have here. Yep. So if you look there on the far right bottom, you will see that that is Jean-Michel Trogneux. Okay. And like I said, I'm going to save some of the photos that we have because Xavier Poussard is going to be our next episode, that interview, and what he worked to get his hands on is explosive, and I do not want to ruin that for him. Jumping back into our timeline, in 1953, his little sister, Brigitte Trogneux, was born. Then we know, like I said, he continued to attend that Jesuit academy. Then we have that famous 1944 family picture, which Best Image released to the documentary maker, who felt like she was, for whatever reason, being questioned by the Élysée Palace, that would be treating her like she was under interrogation. She was able to get her hands on that family picture. 1955 to 1956, he's back at school. Again, we will have those class photos available for you in Xavier's interview in our sit down, which we'll be releasing next. In 1960, Brigitte and Jean-Michel Trogneux's sister, Mary Von Trogneux, dies in a car accident with her husband, Paul Farcy, on February 24th. Their daughter, Natalie, 5 months old at the time, survives and goes on to marry a guy named Richard, and they have 2 daughters. In 1963, the public is then given a photo of what we are told is the real Brigitte Trogneux at communion. We note that this does not look like the current First Lady, and the current First Lady has thus far, to this day, declined to answer my question about whether or not if it's Brigitte Trogneux in the photo, but whether or not it's her in the photo. Important differentiation. In 1963, Jean-Michel Trogneux lived in Algiers, Algeria, in February. So he was 18 years old. This is a highly unusual thing, as Xavier told me, because this was just after the bloody War of Independence, Algeria getting their independence from France. And he says at this time, no Frenchman went to Algeria unless they were communists. But we know that he was there because there was a census available. And we are keen suddenly to get a photo of him around this time because, well, now we're not talking about kid photos, which seems to be the only thing Brigitte Macron wants to release. A very small amount, a total of 3 photos that were released. Doesn't want to release any older photos until suddenly Brigitte Macron is a professor, right? Brigitte Ozier says, oh, I'm a professor. We're just kind of like missing these important years of her life, which would allow us to see the face sort of mutate over time, right? This next photo, which I'm not going to show you because it is explosive and it took Xavier Poussard years to get. He gets his hands on a photo of Jean-Michel Trogneux, who is enrolled in the ESTP school, which is a French engineering school. That becomes the last verified photo that we have on record. But I want you to note he is 18 at this time. You take any person, you take a photo of them when they're 18, and it is very hard to say that you were expecting this person to look majorly different, right? Decades on from that, because you are a young adult, right? Jumping back into this timeline, we then know that the real Brigitte Trogneux marries Andre Louis Ozier, becoming Brigitte Ozier. We have a wedding announcement. We have a wedding photo. It actually happened. And that is the photo which Natasha Ray made an unfortunate and totally understandable mistake regarding. And then, like I told you, for whatever reason, Jean-Michel photographically disappears. He disappears. And then this amazing thing happens. In 1977, when people started recognizing that their first lady, something about this story didn't make sense. When people began first speaking about their suspicions that they were looking at a transitioned man for many reasons, they were able to dig up an interview, okay, from 1977. And it's a man who says that he is transitioned and living as a woman named Veronique. Now, for my English listeners, this is going to be a bit confusing for you. So I'm going to describe to you why this was so explosive. Every person that speaks, you can transition your name, you can try to speak in a different tone, but you have tics, you know, almost things that you say that you don't even recognize that you say, words that you might rely on. And for First Lady Macron, that tic, so to speak, is she says, that is to say, right? That is to say. Some people might say like. You know, like I was going to like the store and like her tic is, that is to say, that is to say. So we have this individual who appears, does not show their face. It's shadowed on this talk show in 1977, says their name is Veronique and says that they have transitioned. And the person has the exact same voice as the current First Lady of France and the same tic. And of course, at the time that the First Lady was doing all these interviews, she never thought that the public was going to dig up this old interview of this transgendered individual on a talk show saying, that is to say, over and over again. So I'm going to play a little bit of this interview. Of course, it is in French, so this will mean nothing to English listeners, but then I'm going to read you the transcript because there's some other important coincidences that happened. Take a listen.
Je crois qu'en fait, il n'y a pas de transformation parce que le psychisme est déjà féminin et l'individu, en l'occurrence moi, est déjà préparé à ce genre de mutation par nécessité, en ce sens qu'on se sent femme et on régularise une situation sans plus. Il n'y a pas mutation, il y a régularisation.
Vous êtes devenue complètement femme, donc vous avez été opérée il y a combien de temps?
J'aime pas tellement le mot devenir complètement femme. Oui. C'est-à-dire que nous devenons une sorte de femme pouvant copuler, mais ne pouvant pas procréer. Oui. De là des problèmes juridiques d'ailleurs, dont on parlera après. Oui. C'est-à-dire que l'intégration se fait sans problème sur le plan individuel, il n'existe que sur le plan social.
Now, essentially, someone in the chat here just said that's her voice, but also someone who said in the chat that this, you could refer to this as a voice footprint. That's a perfect way to say it. It's a voice footprint. There are things that you just can't rinse yourself of, but also, even when you transform your identity, you still have an identity. You still have interests that don't magically go away. If you change your name, okay, this is why I'm going to tell you what she says in the script. If I'm Candace Owens, even if I change my name to Jean-Michel Trogneux, it doesn't transform my interest. It doesn't make me, I love Italian food. I'm not going to suddenly like not like Italian food because I could become Jean-Michel Trogneux. I'm not going to suddenly not be interested in the Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds case because I changed my name legally to Jean-Michel Trogneux. And so this interview was explosive when it was released because of things that Veronique said. So I'm going to pull up the transcript for you in English and read you what this is translating into. So the interviewer asks, he says to the audience, I can only guarantee the authenticity of Veronique's testimony. Veronique, I'd like to know if when you had this operation, which is the one you've had, it was a difficult moment for you, or was it just the culmination of something that had happened before? Veronique says, I don't think there's any transformation because the psyche is already feminine and the individual, in this case me, is already prepared for this kind of mutation out of necessity, in the sense that we feel like women and we merely normalize a situation. There's no transfer, there's normalization. The interviewer says, so you're completely a woman? How long ago did you have the operation? Interestingly enough, she doesn't answer that part of the question of when she had an operation, but she goes on and she says, answers, I don't really like the words completely a woman. In other words, we become a kind of woman who can copulate but cannot procreate. Hence the legal problems we'll be talking about later. In other words, integration goes smoothly on an individual level. They only exist on a social level. Okay, so already she's starting to speak about this trouble that we know that Emmanuel Macron's mother is going to concern herself with, which is like, okay, there are these legal problems with who we identify with and who we know we're women, okay, but we have these legal hoops and barriers, and this is why I'm breaking and telling my story, because we have to change this. We have to be able to change this. The interviewer says, you have a job that we're not going to reveal here. Let's just say it's a job that's about the public. Veronique responds, that's right, I'm a craftsman. I have regular contact with the public. I'm in close contact with customers. I don't have any problems. I used to because I had a phenotypic gender, meaning an ambiguous appearance. They took me for what I wasn't, a homosexual, which wasn't the case, either in my behavior or in my way of thinking. But unfortunately, this image resulted in non-integration. This is partially cut off here for me, but it says non-integration. And actually, I normalized a situation for my integration, and I live very legally and honorably. For civil status purposes, it is possible to change your first name to an ambiguous one. This is very important because it enables integration or pseudo-integration into society, in the sense that there are always problems, but they can be solved administratively by mutual agreement. But legally, there's no solution, unlike all foreign legislation except the Belgian legislation, which is modeled on ours. The interviewer then asks, do you feel that you are now completely yourself and you don't have any problems identifying yourself since your operation? Veronique says, to tell the truth, I only had identification problems towards others, not with myself. I saw myself as what I was, a woman with a body that didn't belong to her. It's very difficult to conceive for someone who's comfortable in one's own skin. I use the term comfortable in one's own skin because it's the typical image, because I didn't have any problems, but people created problems. Now I don't have any problems. To tell the truth, this operation, that is the removal of this useless organ in our case, because it is both unusable and unused. And the interviewer asks her, do you live alone? Veronique says, I'm not with anyone, but I've lived with a woman and conceived this union in the style of George Sand and Chopin. Chopin was probably a transsexual. His style of melody, the way he plays, makes this quite clear. I think the image that has been given of the Rimbaud-Verlaine union is a distorted, caricatured image that doesn't correspond at all. This is very important, okay? She has this speech tic. It's exactly like Brigitte Macron's. If you spoke French, you would understand that. But she also mentioned musical composer Frédéric Chopin, plus mentions gay poets, Paul Verlaine and Arthur Rimbaud. Now, why is that significant? Okay, well, these poets, they were in a homosexual affair, but violent, a very violent relationship. So she's clearly coming across as someone who is tremendously educated. This is not some random person, right? This is somebody who has been educated in the classics, who is on this show for the purpose of trying to move along legislation to be able to make it easier for people who are trans to secure identities. That is the purpose of this appearance, right? And as I said, the purpose of using someone who has sort of this ability to communicate and speak about the high arts is to make people, perhaps the audience, is more sympathetic with the cause, right? She's saying, I was always a woman, which is funny because as I read that, I also, what's ringing in my head is that sentence that Brigitte and Emmanuel wrote to me in the first legal letter. They said, she does not owe you any proof that she has and always will be a woman. Like very strange thing to write. Like, almost like, I believe it and therefore it is. And of course you do owe me proof. If you're going to say that you're going to sue me in a Tennessee court, you absolutely will be owing me proof if you're going to say that I defamed you. But going back to the mention, these classical mentions regarding Chopin, the first couple, when they were creating their legend in the public, claimed that they had moved a piano into the Élysée Palace because Emmanuel Macron, remember the virtuoso, loved to play Chopin for Brigitte and for Brigitte only. So this is something, this matters to the couple, okay? Regarding the homosexual poets that she mentioned, Paul Verlaine and Rimbaud, Emmanuel Macron, while acting as president, considered admitting them both into the Pantheon, which is, it's where they bury all of these French heroes. Okay. And this sparked a massive debate. Like, should these people, first off, one of the lovers shot the other one, had to serve time in prison. Would this be a good thing to move them? He was going to honor them as this like homosexual, these homosexual poets and greats by burying them in this significant structure. But what ended up happening was Rimbaud's family firmly rejected that honor because they did not want his legacy to be reduced to a gay icon. So that's just incredibly fascinating, right? It's incredibly fascinating that you have this person, Veronique, and she's saying and mentioning all the people that we know have this significance in their relationship between Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte. And she has, after somebody used an AI voice analysis, they said that this was 100% the same person. And, you know, I don't know much about these softwares, but for somebody to come out and to declare that this is 100% the same person, and the only difference is that the voice has aged to have the same tics, it's a lot of coincidences. It was major when this happened and when this was revealed. And then there are some more interesting things to remember here, okay? When you jump back into the timeline, so Veronique appears, we don't know what this person's name is in life. They're using this name for this interview, Veronique. No last name. We don't know anything else. But don't forget that this person also said that he's not in a real relationship, but he lives with a woman. Okay, Veronique says he lives with a woman. Well, when we jump back into our Jean-Michel Trogneux timeline, we find that at this time, Jean-Michel Trogneux, following this interview, marries a woman. And ironically, her name is Veronique. So, could it be possible that Jean-Michel took on the name of a dear friend named Veronique, who he was living with, and who he then moved to marry? We don't know because, of course, there are no pictures of this wedding. There's nothing there. Jean-Michel Trogneux on paper gets married to a woman named Veronique Drew. Okay. And then they have a child. They have a child in 1982 named Jean-Jacques. That's the Jean-Jacques that looks tremendously like Emmanuel Macron. And then shortly thereafter, in 1987, Jean-Michel divorces Veronique Drew. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is going on? Seriously, what is going on in this story? What is happening? How do we have these actors who are unable to produce images from these very relevant things that happened in their lives? You know, where is Jean-Michel Trogneux? You got married to a woman. Are there no pictures from your wedding day? No, you decided to just fall off a cliff and stop being photographed at the same moment that Brigitte Macron, the professor, the teacher, was born. Suddenly, like, no more photographs for you. What is going on here? Why do we have a situation in which schools, which are legally required to release photos, I believe the law in France is after 50 years, any person can get any photo of somebody that is in school, right? You can release the yearbook photos. Why are they refusing to release photos of who was supposed to be the first lady in elementary school and in middle school and in college? Why can't we get these photos? Why are people having to go through court and be gaslit to get these photos? If it's really you, Brigitte Macron, and you didn't take on the identity of your sister, if it's really you, why are you struggling to answer basic questions? Forget the conspiracies. Why are you refusing to answer basic questions while trying to push people to sue for defamation, waiting for people to make mistakes? Why not just clarify? Are you the same person pictured in this wedding photo? Are you Brigitte Trogneux? How much more basic of a question could I have asked you other than, did you, Brigitte Macron, give physical birth to 3 children? Okay? Do not allow people, the media, to gaslight you into thinking that you are asking of something that is just such an invasion of privacy. It is completely nutty, okay? We are beyond lunacy when we are talking about such basic questions that could have put this all to bed a long time ago. And we are like 8 years in to them instead preferring to legally try to punk people, to scare people, to intimidate people, sending out thugs potentially, okay? And when we look at that nebula, when we look at the surrounding and the supporting cast of Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte Macron, do you feel comfortable with what's going on here? Is it every day that you need to have someone who forges documents around you? Allegedly, Mimi Marchand, she's still facing trial right now. Someone who's been involved extensively in extortion, who's facing trial right now for extortion. Is it normal to just keep having these sort of gang type members around you, people that can control images, that can edit images and put it in the press? Like, are we going to accept as the public that this is completely normal, that they just keep landing into these pedophile scandals? Or are we going to recognize that something very sinister is going on, that Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte Macron are not presenting themselves as who they say they are, as what they say they are? I believe they were groomed for this position. I believe especially Emmanuel Macron, without question, was groomed by Brigitte. There's no question about that. The only question that remains is who the hell is Brigitte Macron? And the obvious answer to me, and after you see these photos that you are going to see, one in particular, from when Jean-Michel Trogneux was 18, you're going to fall down like I did when I saw it. It's completely crazy. It's completely crazy. And thankfully for the work of Xavier Poussard, the one thing that helped him not make mistakes was that he was using an AI program, which the World Economic Forum has rated the #1 facial detection software, which allowed him to avoid making mistakes. It's the same program that is used by China, right? Obviously, you know, they have in China the social credit system, and everyone's face they have to be able to tell apart, right? Very similar faces they have to be able to tell apart. And this was ranked as the #1 software to be able to do that. And so when he thought something, he ran the software, like with the wedding photo. He ran the software and he said, I know this guy looks like this guy, but the percentage on this software is saying that the cousin and the man are two different people. So he didn't run with that theory. He didn't go just based off of his gut instinct. He also was being aided by a software which was giving him answers before he even really knew what the answers were. We'll have more on that when I sit down with him. But do know that the software he is using has the blessing of the World Economic Forum. And I think we've all figured out that that forum is pretty evil. And they want us all to be able to be identified. And the software, I had to test it out myself to believe in it. It's incredible. I mean, you can take a woman when she's 6 years old. She could have had 20 surgeries in her face to transform her face, and it will still go, that's her, 80% chance. I've never seen anything like it. It kind of terrifies me about our future. It terrifies me about AI in general. But for the purposes of his investigation, it really allowed him to sort things. And there's no question upon seeing this technology, in my mind, that Jean-Michel Trogneux is Brigitte Macron. The only question that I have is what happened to his sister, Brigitte Trogneux. And you'll get to that as well. Like I said, I didn't want to give us too many spoilers ahead of the interview and my sit down with him. But there's just more. There's so much more for us to unpack. The Rothschild connection, the jobs that he got that he didn't deserve, Emmanuel Macron. And like I said, we will get to all of those things. Before I get into some of your questions, I want to remind you guys about American financing, because I know a lot of Americans are carrying high credit card balances that charge 20% or more every month. It is time to take control of your debt. If you're a homeowner and you've been waiting to figure out how to get your finances in order, you need to call my friends at American Financing today. American Financing salary-based mortgage consultants are helping homeowners just like you tap into their home's equity to get out of high-interest debt. They're saving their average customers $800 a month by doing this. Saving that kind of money every month should make the decision very easy. All it takes is a 10-minute, no-cost, no-obligation phone call to find out how much you could be saving. And if you start today, you may be able to delay 2 mortgage payments. So call American Financing today at 800-795-1210. That's 800-795-1210. or you can visit americanfinancing.net/Owens. That's americanfinancing.net/Owens. All right, you guys, by the way, I'm going to try to find a place to put up all of those charts. I mean, you can obviously screenshot it. We're all like internet savvy. And then you can begin working that way through the timeline and things of that nature. But I do hope that I can also create a space like almost like a Reddit forum on CandaceOwens.com, reminding you guys that we also have the book club. We will be doing that in 10 minutes. So I'm going to jump off of this and then I will be on CandaceOwens.com for those of you that signed up for the book club. You know, our first book, which is relevant to the Emmanuel Macron story in many ways, is Chaos, unpacking the Charles Manson murders, the CIA, and the secret history of the 60s. Very relevant to understand a lot of these programs, which we spoke about, sort of these covert operations that were going on behind the scenes. So I'm going to just do 5 minutes here of questions before we have to jump off here. Let's see what we've got. Whoev writes, love and respect from this South Georgia mama to you. Thank you so much. D. Hen writes, Candace, I never was a fan of yours until the USS Liberty episode. Thank you for bringing that story to life because the history books don't. I'm now a huge fan of yours. You speak truth. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And yeah, it's been a journey, but we just have to unpack this evil. And we have to also just have the courage ourselves to recognize that this kind of evil exists. Like we got to kind of pop the bubble. You know, step out of the fairy tale and realize that there are some makers of the world without question. And we need to definitively be able to look at someone like Emmanuel Macron and demand answers because he, in my view, is just, he's not in control. You know, he's never been in control of his entire life. He's a weak, spineless little coward. Mickey writes, may God protect and bless you. Thank you for sharing your faith in Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, and the truth of the wicked ways of the abuse to children. Without question, that is kind of the scariest part of this story is so many powerful people involved in so many of these scandals. Lastly, Alaska Dog writes, Jean-Michel shares a birthday with Alex Jones, also today, whom I'm guessing is enjoying your coverage on the Macrons. Without a doubt, he is. All right, guys, we have got to jump off, as I said, because we have the book club. If you have not signed up for the book club, you absolutely should. Head to CandaceOwens.com. And while you're there, why don't you pick up my new book, Make Him a Sandwich? We will see you guys picking up the Brigitte Macron series with the explosive interview with Xavier Poussard. All right, guys, we'll see you then.